In our today's class, my students, I have a question from a topic called probability that I want us to go through together and be able to share one or two concepts that are very, very important in as far as that topic is concerned. Let me first be able to read the question to you. And the question reads, an examination involves a written test and a practical test. The probability that a candidate passes the written test is 6 over 11. If the candidate passes the written test, then the probability of passing the practical test is 3 over 5. Otherwise, it would be 2 over 7. Part A of that question illustrates this information in a tree diagram. Part B, Roman 1, determine the probability that a candidate passes both tests. Roman 2, determine the probability that a candidate passes the written test only. Part 3 says determine the probability that a candidate passes only one test. And the last part, Roman 4, determine the probability that a candidate passes the last test and fails the first test. And the last one says, that's Roman 5, determine the probability that a candidate fails both tests. So in any question that gets obtained from this topic called probability, you are either supposed to use a tree diagram or be able to use a square-like arrangement to just get the possible outcomes for that. It otherwise gets called a Punnett square in biology and a topic called genetics. So let me first just come up with what we call a tree diagram for this question. So you have been told that in an examination, so there is an examination, and in this examination, there are two tests. We have what you call a written test and we have a practical test. So I can abbreviate this written test with letter W and abbreviate this practical test with letter P. And the question says the probability that a candidate passes the written test is 6 over 11. So this can be our tree diagram. And of course, this is the origin. The branches we may end up coming up with in this tree diagram will depend on the number of the outcomes expected here. We have two very important aspects to consider. One, the written test and the practical test. So we only have two very important branches from the origin, representing one, the written test, two, the practical test. So I'll say this is W and this is P. So written test, then the practical test. So the probability that a candidate passes the written test. So in this written test, there are two possibilities. One, you either pass or you fail. Okay, even in this practical test, you can either pass that practical test or fail the same practical test. Look at that. So that tells us that in this case, our written test can either have a pass or a fail. And our practical test can also have either a pass or a fail. So I'll have P to confirm that this written test has been passed, or an F to confirm that this written test has been failed. When I come back to this, when I have this practical test, the person can either pass that practical test or later on be able to still have the person failing the practical test, depending on the number of times the person has actually attempted these tests. So listen to this. The probability that a candidate passes the written test is 6 over 11. This is our written test. The probability of passing this written test is 6 over 11. So pass written test, 6 over 11. Now, the probability now which is not given here, but you need to get to make your working easier. You see, that the person will actually have to write in case that written test is failed is going to be 5 over 11. How did I get this? I just said 11 minus 6. What do I get? 5 over 11. Get the point? So that means 6 over 11, 5 over 11. So when these two are added, the answer must be 1. So I can say 6 over 11 plus 5 over 11. That gives us the whole number 1. Probability cannot be more than 1. It is a matter of chance that a particular item will be found. For example, a matter of chance that a particular event will occur. You see? So the ability of something or the chances of a particular occurrence being able to get talked about is what we refer to as probability. For example, we have been told if the candidate passes the written test, then the probability of passing the practical test is 3 over 5. So if the person passes the written test, the probability of passing the practical test is 3 over 5. So you have passed the written test and you have also passed the practical test. So you'll be able to have 3 over 5 as the probability of passing the practical test. Probability of passing the written test. So you pass the written test, the probability is 6 over 11. When you have passed this written test, you can also pass the practical test. How? The probability of passing the practical test is 3 over 5. Now, what is the probability of failing the practical test? 2 over 5. How? 5 minus 1. That gives us 4. And 5 minus 3, that gives us 2. So she'll say 5 minus 3, which gives us 2. So it will be 2 over 5. So that 3 over 5 and 2 over 5 should give us the whole number 1. You get the point? Now, and they've told us if the candidate passes the written test, then the probability of passing the practical test is 3 over 5. Otherwise, it will be 2 over 7. So, if this person passes the written test, or we can be able to rearrange it in this manner so that it can be easier for us to actually work it out. So, we can have this, have this, and have this. Let's say you have this as your origin, then you have passing and failing. Look at that. And let's have this one as our written test, being our origin. You see, so if this becomes our written test and this becomes our origin, this written test can either be passed or be failed. And we have been told that the probability of passing this written test is 6 over 11. And that means the probability of failing the same written test, as the way I've actually explained my first explanation, is going to be 5 over 11. Because this over this plus this over this should give us one whole number. And they have told us if the candidate passes the written test, so this is our written test, you can either pass it or fail it. So if this candidate passes the written test, then the probability of passing the practical test is 3 over 5. So you have passed the written test. Okay? Then probability of passing again the practical test. So these are our practical tests. Practical tests. Look at that. So I had the written test. It can either get passed or get failed. If it gets passed, it is 6 over 11. If it gets failed, it is 5 over 11. Look at that. And this written test is directly able to get associated with the practical test. They are dependent on each other. You get the point? They are actually able to depend on each other. The ability of a particular event occurring depends on another occurrence or another activity still occurring. So, if I pass the written test, then I can also be able to pass the practical test. And if I pass the written test, I can pass the practical test. And this probability is 3 over 5. But I've said otherwise it would be 2 over 7. That means if I fail the written test, you see, and I pass the practical test, then I'm going to have here 2 over 7. Look at that. I wrote a test which was written, I passed it. The probability is 6 over 11. Failing that written test is able to have a probability of 5 over 11. If this is my probability of passing the written test, and I confirm I've actually passed, then I can also pass the practical test. And the probability of passing the practical test depends on the ability to pass the written test. So if I pass this written test, I can also pass the practical test. And this is 3 over 5. So then that means I can still as well be able to pass the written test, then fail the practical test. Look at that. And if I pass the written test and fail the practical test, the probability is 2 over 5. Now, I have failed the written test. The probability of passing the practical test is 2 over 7. And if I fail the written test and also fail the practical test, then the probability will be 3, not 3, that will be 5 over 7. I pass the written test, I also pass the practical test. Or I pass the written test, then I fail the practical test. Or I fail the written test, then I pass the practical test. Or I fail the written test, then I also fail the practical test. So, the first question, illustrate this information in a tree diagram. That becomes our tree diagram. And of course, we can capture the possible outcomes here. So this means pass written test and also pass practical test. And this is going to be I pass the written test, but I fail the practical test. Pass written test, fail practical test. And here, fail written test and pass practical test. Or this, you can say fail written tests. So fail written tests, fail written tests, and also fail practical tests. So pass written test, pass practical test. Pass written test, fail practical test. Fail written test, pass practical test. Fail written test, fail practical test. So that is our tree diagram that can be able to allow you to get 2 marks. The next part, determine the probability that a candidate passes both tests. So Roman 1, probability of passing both tests will be, so we'll say probability of passing the written tests and passing the practical tests. Passing both tests. So I have passed the written test and I've also passed the practical test. So probability, P, probability of passing the written test and passing the practical test. So probability of passing the written test and passing the practical test. What is the probability of passing the written test? 6 over 11. Then, what is the probability of passing the practical test? 3 over 5. So that gives us an estimated probability of 18 out of 55. So that becomes our answer. That becomes our answer. Let's go to the next part of that question. And the question demands that we get the probability of passing the written test only. So Roman 2, we shall say probability of passing the written test only. Probability of passing the written test only. So how do I get the probability of passing the written test only? So I should look for that scenario where only the written test gets passed. And that means the person fails the practical test. So this is the only option. Remember, this became our option for Roman 1. So this becomes our option for Roman 2. So, pass the written test, pass the practical test was our first case. And in this case, you'll be told the person only passes the written test. You'll say, pass written test and fail practical test. So, probability of pass the written test and fail the practical test. This translates into, so pass the written test, 6 over 11. Multiply by, fail the practical test, 2 over 5. So this becomes 12 out of 55. That becomes our final answer for that question. Roman 3 states that we get the probability that a candidate passes only one test. The probability that a candidate passes only one test. So it can either be a written test or a practical test. So we shall say probability of passing, so probability of passing only one test. So what do? You say probability of passing the written test and failing the practical test. Okay? Or because there's only a possibility of passing one test. So you can either pass the practical test or the written test. So you can say probability of passing the written test and failing the practical test, or as well, you can actually say probability or probability of passing the practical test and failing the written test. So those are the most common possible what? Options or outcomes for us to come up with. So pass written tests, 6 over 11. Because and in probability means multiplication. Then multiply by fail practical test, 2 over 5. Correct. That's correct. Then or in probability means addition. Then pass practical test. Pass practical test, 3 over 5. Then and means multiplication. Then fail written tests, 5 over 11. So this is going to be 12 out of 55 plus 15 out of 55. So the summation of this, because the denominators are the same, let's say we're just going to be 55. So just add the numerator. So 12 plus 15, that gives us 27. So our answer for that becomes 27 out of 55. 27 out of 55. And the last part says fails both tests. So fails both tests. So I'm going to say probability of failing written tests and failing practical tests. You have failed all the tests. So probability of failing the written test and as well failing the practical test. So failing the written tests, which is 5 over 11, multiplied by failing the practical tests. Failing the practical tests. That is 2 over 5. 2 over 5. 2 over 5. Correct. Or that gives us now failing the tests. Failing both tests. So fail the written test, fail the practical test. This is the option you can be able to use. So we shall say written test fail, 5 over 11. Practical test fail, 5 over 7. So be able to actually say 5 over 11 times 5 over 7. Very good. Correct. So that gives us 25 out of 77. 25 out of 77. Here, only one test is passed. So, pass written, 6 over 11. Fail practical, 2 over 5. Or, you can say, pass written, 5 over 11. Yes, that is the practical is failed, and 2 over 7. So fail pass. So 5 over 11, and this is supposed to be, yeah, it's correct. So 3 over 5, you have passed, and that is 6 over 11. So that is written test passed, 6 over 11. Then practical test failed, 2 over 5. Correct? Then we'll come here and say 3 over 5. So we will be able to say this is going to be, there's a mistake here. So we are going to have a past practical and fail written. So fail written 5 over 11 multiplied by the other past practical 2 over 7. So this gives us that is going to be 10 over 77, correct? And now this translates into, so we're going to say 12 over 55 plus 10 over 77, so that we can be able to get our answer. So we'll have 12 over 55 plus 10 over 77. So that gives us 134 over 385. Correct. That becomes our final answer for that question.